my computer. All right, terrific. So welcome to the 7th Literacy Volunteers Continuing Education Workshop. My name is Timothy O'Sullivan, and I'll be conducting the presentation. Today's topic, I think, will be really easy and fun. We're going to talk about teaching English pronunciation. And let me show you the PowerPoint. All right. So can everyone see the screen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, let's begin. I'll move your faces off to the side. One thing about this is, I do want to demonstrate with my hands. So let me know if the video is too small, because a lot of the pronunciation techniques I use involve using the hands to emphasize when the sound is occurring or different features of the sound. So if you need me to stop sharing and that might make the video larger, just tell me. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. There we go. Right, so you've seen this before. Just an update. I'm up to 81,000 minutes with 1,118 different students. So I hope talking with them, all the various challenges I've encountered with pronunciation, I can kind of systematize that and give you some quick tips. So the game plan for today, we're just going to talk about the features of the English language. Britt's actually seen this before. I had this as the last slide of the new tutor training, and the first item was pronunciation. So we'll look at that and we'll dive into pronunciation after that. Look at an overview, and finally it looks like we have 7 techniques which I think you can use regardless of the student's language background to help explain a sound and help them practice it. All right, and the final thing is we'll talk about when you really want to work on pronunciation, because I really like sounds. I like music and I like working with language sounds, but it can be a grueling process. I know when I've practiced Russian, some of the sounds I have no problem with, but one it seems I can't even hear, and the Russian speakers tell me every time, it's like, Tim, you're not saying that correctly, and I'm not going to do it because it'll be permanent evidence that I can't do it. But I guess I need a lot more work to acquire this skill. And that's why working on this at the right frequency and at the right times helps the student not be discouraged, and also to accept their accent or accept the way they speak, which is honestly probably a nice thing. If you meet someone who has an accent, does it sound bad? Probably not. It probably sounds cool, and it tells you where they're from. If they want to be a spy, maybe they need to be serious about changing the accent. But for ordinary use, I think there's no problem with it. So let's look at features of English. And this is not comprehensive, but in teaching English, the things that have stood out to me have been these 6 factors, roughly in this order. So I showed Britt this before. Today we're going to talk about pronunciation. That's why it's in red. But there's other features. The second most prominent when I'm talking with students is word types, especially nouns and adjectives. When we're learning words and when they're using words, it seems that English nouns and English adjectives always come together. So they might use one when they mean the other. After that, we have the verbs, which are basically separate. That has its own dimension. And the least important is adverbs. In fact, it's so unimportant, I'd really like to put it below derivative word types. And derivative word types are forms of words that come from the primary forms. So the primary forms are nouns, adjectives, and verbs, but you can get, say, a gerund. The gerund is the noun form of an adjective. The sentence I always go to is, acting is fun. So in that sentence, the subject was acting. It's a noun phrase. It's not a verb. It's a derivative of a verb, but it's acting as a noun. So I think those are more important in terms of what you want to express and what students encounter expressing. Another example is the past and present participles. I'm sorry, participles. So my stress is not always correct also. So the past and present participles. These are adjectives, basically, derived from verbs. For example, I can see the crying girl in the corner. So to cry is a verb, but I didn't say in that sentence I had an adjective in front of the girl. I qualified her with crying. I could have said the tall girl, but instead I said the crying girl. So I basically derived an adjective from a verb and I've put it in front of a noun. So those are interesting. We're not going to talk about those today. Then there's the logic and order of the English sentence, and that's number 4, subject, verb, object. Again, we're not going to talk about that today. And then when you are teaching or analyzing a sentence, you really want to break it down into the individual components. So you'll have noun phrases. That's a noun, like the most important noun in the sentence or in that phrase, and whatever you attach onto it, whatever adjectives you attach onto it, whatever determiners, it's like my, his, this, the, those are all determiners. You attach those to a noun in a noun phrase. For example, the big friendly lion is sleeping. So the predicate was separate from the noun phrase. The noun phrase was the big friendly lion. All those are one item. It's the noun phrase. So when you're analyzing a sentence, like the students, I don't understand, you can type it out, put brackets around this piece and say, that's the noun phrase, that's the subject, and then go to the next part. Prepositional phrases, the big friendly lion is sleeping in the cave. That's the prepositional phrase, or that's what I call it. It's marked by the preposition, and it has more flexibility as to where you can put it in the sentence. In the cave, the big friendly lion is sleeping. Okay, and then relative clauses. That gives more information about something higher. How should I say this? It gives more information about an item in the main sentence. So if you have the main sentence, the relative clause stands below it and adds more information. What's an example? This presentation, which I made last night, I expect to be very fun. So, which I made last night is extra information, which I just put in there. And it's attached to presentation. This presentation, which I made last night, I expect to be very fun. Anyway, the tenses you might think are very important, and probably they are, but I think you have to have those individual objects before you can start linking them with tenses, which express time. So starting from ideas, objects, and qualities, finally we get down to the tenses. And we'll talk about that another time, because I want this particular lesson to be fast and easy. So let's move on and start talking about pronunciation. Okay, so when you are teaching any language, we teach English, we encounter students from many different countries and many different language backgrounds. This is the origin of their own habits and their own sound system. So if you encounter a student, you might say, this student from Asia has this kind of problem, and this student from the Arab world has a different kind of problem. I'm not going to talk about that today. I think there are universal features of the English sound system which you can analyze and explain regardless of where the student originated. However, sometimes a student will have absolutely no problem with certain sounds, which is great. And then there'll be a sound which they've never made before in their life, and they can't even hear it, which is kind of interesting. So apparently you build like a neurological sense of sound, and that's a challenge when you're trying to teach a new sound. However, we're just going to talk about the universal features of the English sound system. So before we move on, I'm going to ask you the question, can you think of a prominent feature of the English language in terms of sound? How does it sound to you? Let me give you an example. What about the TH sound? Math and the. I think other languages don't really have it. They might not have it at all, or they have it very rarely. Whereas in English, it's one of the most common sounds. Right, that's one example. Say something and listen to yourself. Let's go to Larry.
Okay, say something. The Man in the Moon.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. The, so we had the TH. Man in the moon. The man in the moon. I think you blended the sounds together. Students will comment on that in English. So, the man in the moon. It's not like they were separate. That could be an American style. Whereas if you were from England, you might say, the man in the moon. That's the best I can do. But it was more separate than the American, which was blended together. So yeah, when we look at our examples later in the presentation, we'll do it organically. So I'll just get a sample of English and look at it. We'll talk about some of the features. But the techniques you're going to learn could apply to any word you're trying to analyze. Okay? So I'll just read the last note to make sure I don't miss a detail. So today we will learn useful techniques to help clarify a sound and how to make it to any student. So remember, they might have trouble hearing what you're saying, and there's not a direct link between a word that's written and the actual sound that it produces, especially in English. English has, this might be a feature, a spelling system which is not straightforward. So you want to analyze the sound and explain it to the student clearly so they know which parts of their body to use to make it. Otherwise, they're basically shooting in the dark. Okay, so let's move on to the first technique. I call this one Vowel Meter. And we're starting with this because the vowel is the central word, the central sound in a word. You might start with a consonant sound, but you're going to make that sound move over the central sound, which is the vowel. And you make the vowel with various mouth shapes. So even if you start with a consonant sound, which might have your lips together like B, where it lands is going to be over the vowel sound. So we have E, E in the center. If I start with B, the B sound, I have to make sure it goes over E. B. So it transitions immediately into the B sound. So the first element when you're teaching a word, the pronunciation of a word to a student, is to make sure that the vowel sound is precise. And this is where the vowel meter comes in. So before we talk about that, let me look at this example of wedding and waiting. This is from today. I could not hear what the student was saying. She said we had to go to another waiting. The only problem with what she's saying basically is the vowel was not correct. Instead of saying eh, she was saying a, waiting. I had my cousins waiting. Oh, you're saying wedding. I understand. More important than the consonant t, t, waiting, or d, d, wedding, was the vowel. That's what I heard first. So we have to make sure that they're precise on the vowel, not a, but e. Okay. I like to contrast two vowel sounds together because if they're missing it, I have to tell them these are related sounds, but you're on the wrong side. Okay. So let's look at the example for under number 3. We have set, sit, seat. These are all related, but I think on two ends of the spectrum, you have the eh and the e, where I is in the middle. All right. Do you agree? I might be wrong about this. So a scientist could look at the sound and say, actually, Tim, it's a different frequency. But as far as how I hear it, I think I, e is a relevant spectrum to talk about. So when the student is trying to say sit, but instead they're saying seat, you have to tell them you need to adjust. So you're forming, this is our first technique, you're forming the meter with your hands in this prayer shape. So it's just like the meter you see on the PowerPoint. On one end you have E, and on the other end you have E. And you want to help them adjust their sound to some intermediate to get to I. So instead of seat, we want to say si, I, sit. And maybe they'll miss it. They'll say set. Then we say you went too far, you have to go back to the intermediate sound. Understand? Let's look at a different word. This is going, or a different pair of words. This is going to be bell and bear. So bell like a church bell and bear like Winnie the Pooh. So the spectrum you could analyze is E for L, and then A, which is all the way on the other side, and air is in the middle. E, E, A. So you have to make sure that the student hits that intermediate sound. That's where you start, and then you can start working on the L sound, or the R sound, or the B sound on top of the vowel. All right. Any questions?
Did you say at the beginning that we should not be that focused on their accents, or did I misinterpret what you said?
Well, you don't want to. There's a strong psychological effect of pronunciation. And one thing I don't like one change I don't like to make in the students is if I let them know that they're not saying a word correctly, afterwards they always pause before they say it or before they read it. And it makes the whole speech more unnatural. So it seems that if they become self-conscious about the pronunciation, it's going to make the total communication worse. Whereas even if they're not saying it correctly, but they're understandable, I think it's more natural and more relaxed. I'd keep that as a priority over the pronunciation. So by all means, try to make sure they say things correctly, but not to the point where they become discouraged. All right, great question. Are we ready to move on? Let's hit the next one. So there's nothing, this is the technique. There's nothing on the slide because it's pretty basic. When you are working with the word, you're going to have to focus and make sure that you hear what the student is saying. So if they say a word, listen to what the problem is, or listen to how well it hits the true target, and then say it so that they can hear it. And then they repeat, say it again. And if they repeat and they're closer, that's good, you're making progress. But this is your diagnostic technique. You have to listen closely to the word and adjust what they're saying. This ties in to the vowel meter. You have to tell them you're hitting this way now. Good, now you're back here. Actually, now you're going too far back to E. You have to hit I in the center. One good thing to do at this stage is to ask them to say it 3 times fast. So if you have a word that they need to practice, they might be able to say it once with some preparation in their mind, but you want them to be able to hit it rapid fire. So say, please say it 3 times fast. All right, 1, 2, 3. Great. 2 of the 3 times you got it correct. The last time you did this. Okay? So this is a really simple technique. Just listen and adjust. Next, sound blending. Since we're all native speakers of English, I decided to analyze a Russian word today. This is the Russian word for hello. Okay, it has a lot of blended consonants together, but it's one of the first words you'll learn. So I'll say it. Здравствуйте. That's the full natural speed. Hello. Здравствуйте. Now the individual sounds. Let me see if you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this is Z, Z, D, R, A, V, S, T, V, U, T. Okay, there's a lot of sounds blended together. So a little faster. Zdravstvuyte. In fact, when you say it at natural speed, you don't say the V here. So it looks like a B to us. That's their V. So at a natural speed, it's zdravstvuyte. Zdravstvuyte. So, can I have a volunteer to practice the word? Who wants to learn to say hello in Russian today? Anyone? I think Britt looks a little enthusiastic.
I'll try.
Let's do it. Okay. So we'll do the first syllable. That's zdrast. Zdrast.
Zdrast.
That's not bad. So we'll do the individual elements. Z,
Z.
D.
D.
Now, ra.
Ra.
Yeah, I hear it. You have to trill the tongue. R, ra.
Ra.
Good. And then the vowel. Ah, ah,
Ah.
ah. Mm-hmm.
Ah.
St. No, st. Okay, good. So luckily those sounds exist already in English. Maybe not the trilled R. Yeah. But imagine explaining this to someone who doesn't have that blend, or whose language has no blends at all. Japanese, for example, seems not to have blends. They want to avoid it. Okay? But we have it in our Indo-European languages. So let's say it quickly. The first syllable, zdrast.
Zdrast.
Not bad. Okay? Now, the next part, vui.
Vui.
Mm-hmm. Vui.
Vui.
Mm-hmm. And then ye.
Ye.
Yeah. So the E here is actually a ye sound. It's going to be tie.
Tie.
Mm-hmm. Vuitie.
Vuitie.
Yep. Vuitie.
Vuitia. Tie.
Mm-hmm.
Or
It's
tie.
closer. So this is where the blend comes in. It's not a pure A. It's over, if we have like ye, and then we have yay, it's going to be a little in the middle. Yay. Yeah. Do you hear it?
Yeah, I don't know if I can do it.
So we'll try it.
Yeah.
So let's do just yeah.
Yeah.
And then we'll go all the way to the other side. Yay. Mhm. Yay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
one more time.
Yeah.
That's too much to the yeah.
Yeah.
Try to do yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's better. So this might be a feature of English. We tend to finish the sound, whereas some languages seem to relax at the end of the sound, and it just kind of, I would say, dies. The sound dies. So I don't like it so much, but I'm biased because I speak English. So I always want to do yay, and then it's basically finished. Or yeah, so it's finished. Yeah, yay. Whereas this is yeah,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. All right, so let's try Vwitye.
Vitya.
Okay, and now Здравствуйте.
Здра... Здравствуйте. Здравствуйте.
So I'll understand you. If I was a Russian person, I'd say, oh, hello, how are you? Let's try it again. Здравствуйте.
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 Good. So there's a lot of sounds blended in that. But you can analyze the individual pieces, like from the beginning, z, d, ra, a, st, f, and go through. Then you have to blend it, and so on. So basically, the technique of sound blending is to start with the individual elements and then progressively have them say it faster and faster. Okay? Very nice. Let's move on to sound mechanics. I apologize for the macabre image, but it's your tool. This is what you use to make most of your sound. Your skull, if you can believe it. Throat also, we'll talk about those parts. When you're explaining to the student what is happening when you make the sound and it's not working, they're missing a piece, it's probably because they don't know which part of their mouth to use or which part of their skull to use. Or maybe they have a nasally effect on a word. And it means that you're trying to make the sound with your nasal cavity. You're getting resonance from your nasal cavity when in native English we wouldn't use it. We keep the sound completely in our mouth. So I think this slide is going to be fun because we're going to try and alter some regular sounds and see if we can move them to different parts of our body. Okay, so there's four principal components you're going to use to make the sound. One is the mouth, a little obviously. It's going to be the shape, how you hold it. Like if you do A, this is interesting. Feature of English, the corners of our mouths are very active. So A is basically like a smile. So if you're wondering why they're doing and not A, it's probably because their mouth is not as active as ours. A, eh. So try to get them to use those corners. So parts of the mouth, from the lips, the corners of the mouth, to the teeth, to the tongue, to the regions of the mouth, whether you're making it in the front or you're making it in the back. That will affect how the sound is. Right? The throat also, let's analyze that for a second. We're going to make two sounds. One is the S sound and one is the Z sound. So if you could put your hand on your throat just for a moment, try to just do the hiss of an S. Try it. Okay. Now we're going to do the Z sound. Make the Z sound. Zzz.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's basically the same sound in the mouth. I should say the same arrangement in the mouth, but you're going to vibrate the vocal cords at the same time. So these are related sounds, but you're incorporating two sound-producing components at the same time. Same thing for sh, sh, and zh, zh. We don't use zh so much in English, but Russian does, for example. Okay, so then the chest. This is usually when you're trying to be loud, so it's not ordinary, but you can still use your chest. I know if you have chest congestion, probably you sound a little different. And then the skull. The main part of the skull to make sounds is going to be the nasal cavity. So you can bring the sound up into the nose, you can bring it away from the nose into the throat. So singing probably would help analyze how to put different effects on sounds. But today we're just going to look at some ordinary samples. Okay, so let me stop the share so I can bring up my Google page. That's not going to be easy because there's a lot of things going on here. So I'm going to escape from this, bring up the Google window, share the screen of this Google Chrome page. Okay, this is an article I did with one of my students this past week. So it's level 9 proficient, so I think we can look at some of the words that this student was learning. So let's look at altitude. That one looks good. Okay, so let's look at altitude. And where do we feel the sounds happening in this word? So, starting with the first syllable, ow. Which parts were involved in the first syllable of altitude? You can make it, so feel it with your mouth. Ow. What did you use to make that sound?
Tongue.
Yes, very important. Feature of English, you'll see it next. The tongue is very strong. Arabic, Russian, and English are very powerful with the tongue, though not exactly in the same way. So, ah, ah. I made the shape with my mouth, and then I ended the sound with the tongue, touching the teeth. Ow. So both the mouth shape, the tongue, and the teeth were involved in one sound. So when you're helping a student make the sound, you have to work with those three components. First, ah, ah, make sure they have the right shape, and then you have to tell them how to stop it, how to stop the air. Ow, ow. Put the tongue in the right place. 3 steps to analyzing the first syllable. T, t. How do you make that?
That's the tip of the tongue against your front teeth.
Exactly. So English is pretty involved with the tongue. Al, t, tude. Okay. So between t and tu, we had to change the shape to make the new vowel. T, just kind of neutral. T, tu, d. Let's analyze the difference between T and tu for a second. So t, 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 t is like the S, right? We're not vibrating the throat at the same time. D, d, d. You get that thickness of the D sound by involving your vocal cords at the same time. They call it the voiced consonant. So t, t, and d, d. You involve the vocal cords to make the D sound. Altitude. Altitude. Very interesting. Okay, let's look at the next word. We're not going to look at this too deeply because we could do this forever. We'll do ignite. Ig, Ignite. So what's involved in the first syllable? Ig. How do you make the G sound? Not G, but G. G. How do you make that sound?
The throat.
You're
Back.
right. Now, instead of using the tongue with the front of the mouth, now we're using it with the back of the mouth. G. G.
G.
I. So we start with the right vowel shape. Ig. Ig. Skull shape. Night. I. Ig. Night. So lots happening there. You can imagine why it's hard to learn to speak for the first time when you're a baby, and also when you're trying to learn a new language and you don't use these parts. Probably they use most of them, but maybe they don't use them at all. That's completely new. So ig, nai, now we're using the nasal cavity, nai, and we blend into the mouth shape, I, and end it with the tongue. T. Ignite. Ignite. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right, it's this guy, and then we're going to screen share. All right, from current slide. Yeah, so there's a lot of things involved when you make the sounds. You have the teeth, and you have the nasal cavity, the tongue inside the mouth, the shape of the lips, the throat, and if you're doing something very powerful, probably the chest also. So that's just an example. It's a lot of fun. Let's watch a quick video. We encountered it with the last, there's a logical sequence to these techniques, but you're probably going to do a lot of tongue work with your students. So let's look at this YouTube video. And let me know, I don't think it's sharing. So let me go ahead and pause this. Okay. Pause that. Great. Let's alter the screen share. If I press this, do a new share. Awesome. Actually, there's a graceful way to do this. Okay. Can everyone see the MRI image on the YouTube video?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go ahead and press that. Let's look at English using that tongue. That's incredible. Can you believe it? That's what speech looks like from an MRI. So you can see the tongue activity. English is interesting because there's no trills. There's the R's are pretty ordinary, but we're touching with the tongue very, very frequently. It's like a tapping. So that's a very precise motor skill that English speakers have learned, which requires a lot of strength. So certain languages, and I tried to find it, like Chinese. The Chinese tongue is usually focused or kept completely in the back of the mouth, and that affects the pitch and the tone of what they're saying. I don't know anything about it. All right, let me just repeat that while we're here. So their tongue, in contrast, would be in the back of their mouth, basically out of the way, maybe changing the shape of the mouth to affect the pitch and the tone. But the English bring the tongue forward, and they are stabbing with it constantly when they're talking. So besides analyzing the individual sounds to make sure, hey, touch the back of your teeth when you do make sure your tongue is in the right position, you're probably going to have to exercise their tongue. So this is like a workout because this is not something their language might do. So they need some stamina. It's an interesting point on the tongue. Let's go back to the share of the PowerPoint. Okay, so when I say this technique is tongue work, I mean you need to focus on the stamina of the student's tongue, the strength and the stamina and the coordination of the tongue. that could be part of the problem if they're having some kind of difficulty. Okay, minimize that. Moving on to the next slide. The rhythm chop. I like this one a lot. When you have a word, you need to isolate it in the individual syllables in English. When we looked at Здравствуйте, there were a lot of individual sounds. Sound 1, Z, 2, D, R, A, S, T, V, U, T. So a lot of sounds. I didn't count them, but it's a lot. Whereas it's only 3 syllables. Здравствуйте. So the rhythm chop is what I just did. It's visual. The student can feel it. You want them to do it with you, right? Like drumsticks. You see them like before they're starting. So when you're analyzing the sound, you have to make sure that they count the correct number of syllables. One time this happens frequently is when you use the past tense of a verb, because some will not change the number of syllables when they go into the past tense, and some will. So let's look at to wait and waited. So that's 2 syllables. Wait, 1, waited, 2. Whereas kick and kicked is still 1 syllable. Kick, kicked. It might be frustrating to the student that English people count that as 1 syllable. They say, logically, there's more sounds involved. But still, if we were writing a poem or a song, that would be considered 1 unit, syllable. So if you're working with a word, I highly recommend that you help the student understand it with the rhythm chop. So let's go back to our article that was online and look at a word. Okay. Okay, let's look at the first sentence.
Can it be any bigger? I can't see it at all.
Okay, thanks for letting me know. How's that?
Yeah.
Better? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry about that. Look at Virgin Galactic has revealed the interior. That's it. So, Virgin, 2, Galactic, has, those are all pretty straightforward. Revealed. This one, they might say reveal it. It's 3, whereas it should be revealed. So if you say it just auditorily, right, revealed, they might not notice what your point is. But if you combine it with the visual and physical stimulus, then they know 2 sounds is the point of what you're trying to say, what you're trying to alert them to. So, Virgin Galactic has revealed the interior. It's 4. Interior. Okay? So simple, but it's honestly one of the most frequent things I use. Okay, and there's one more. Stress wave. You can use a whiteboard to indicate on a word where the stress is. However, I find that using my hand to show how the sound changes in terms of stress to be one of the most useful techniques. So let's think about the one that was on the Virgin Galactic article, atmosphere. It starts at the top and goes down, atmosphere, atmosphere. So the peak is at the beginning, goes down. Whereas ignite goes up. So combining it with the video feed as you're saying it, you should use your hand to demonstrate how the sound is changing. Again, the visual stimulus plus the sound stimulus helps them understand what they're missing or where to put the stress. So let's look at the article one more time. We'll go up to the top. Momentum. In the pronunciation, you can see this apostrophe, which marks that the middle syllable is going to be the strong one. It's placed before the strong stress. So momentum. However, if that were absent, or if they didn't notice it, you could use your hand to say momentum, momentum. So I think the stress wave is a very useful technique, along with the rhythm chop, probably the two I use the most. All right, let's go back to PowerPoint. Okay, so this is the next section. So any question on the techniques that we've seen so far? Right. Keep them in mind. I hope they help you. But let's talk about when to work on pronunciation. So Larry asked a great question about should we focus on it or not, basically. And I told you, psychologically, if you make it a big issue, it will become a big psychological issue for the student. So you can do it incidentally. So if you're in a conversation and they make a particular mistake, you can correct them and just move beyond it. So actually, it's momentum. Ah, yes, momentum. And then you keep going, right? Don't get stuck on it. The other time is during reading. So if the student is working on that article, for example, basically it's a long article about the Virgin Galactic commercial spaceship. They might not know many of those words. They might know what they mean, but they've never said them. So when you're reading, you can help them pronounce it correctly. It's very important because they have some information associated with that word, like what it means, but they need to associate also the proper sound. So reading is a great time to keep them on track. But this is one of those times when you can install the psychological apprehension about the word. Because if they have a problem with it, if the word occurs several times in the reading, that's when they're going to stop before they say it, and it's not natural. So ideally, you would give them the correct pronunciation without making them self-conscious about it. Okay. Elements of vocabulary is another time when you can talk about pronunciation. This is if the vocabulary is the focus of the lesson, or if it's attached to a reading, just like we saw with the other one. It had altitude and so on in a list, and then it had the article. That's fine. Sometimes the student brings an article that they need. Maybe it's a science journal, for example, and they've prepared beforehand the vocabulary. And then they can say, can I check these words? You say yes, and you check the pronunciation and the usage. Okay? And then, if the student asks you, please today, can we work on pronunciation? How do you go about doing that? Do you pick a word off the top of your head? It's probably not the best thing. I recommend tongue twisters. So if you can get a list of tongue twisters, they're a lot of fun, and it's something you can work with. You don't have to challenge the student to say the whole tongue twister very quickly. It's just something to start. Okay, if you want to say this, let's start with the first word, right? And then you break down the sound like we did when we were looking at the techniques. Another thing you can use are standard samples. And I like using these because they're real examples of good English. I could make example sentences like I did today. The big friendly lion is sleeping. That's not a real sentence. That's only useful to talk about language in the most abstract way. But if you want to help the student look at a good example, probably they aspire to read books in English or to watch English TV shows. So you can pick something from a book and then type that in the message and say, okay, we're going to look at this sentence. Probably that is a better way than making a fake sentence just for the situation. So that's what I recommend, the tongue twisters or a standard sample. All right. And if you can believe it, that's the last slide. So any questions on anything you like, English pronunciation or anything I can help you with?
Just a comment. I find that most of the people want to have their accent corrected. In fact, that's one of their objectives. They say that when they're on the phone, everybody knows they're French, and they'd like to sound like they were more of a Native American.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But on the other hand, we don't want to take away their identity. There's nothing wrong with a nice French accent. It's actually very pleasant to the ear, to our ear. But for many of them who are learning English, they want to learn American English and sound as authentic as they can. So you're always torn between breaking that down or maintaining it.
Great point. In fact, when you talk about the quality of your lessons, and you say, well, the lesson is in English, so aren't I helping them? Isn't this something that's going to help them? I'm filling the tank with vocabulary, or we're practicing speaking, or they're practicing listening. Possibly. However, this is where more practical objectives come in mind. So if you focus on the pronunciation, for example, it might help them on some level, maybe a achievement level, like, I finally have that perfect accent. But on a practical communication level, they're not improving in that so much, maybe a little bit, because they're listening, they're speaking with you. But if you focus on that element, they'll make better gains on the practical side versus gains on the superficial side. Now, pronunciation might be essential to be understood, but beyond being understood, the rest is kind of aesthetic. And like you said, Larry, the French accent is aesthetic to us. So we hear them speak with a French accent, like, oh, that's great. You're from France. How's France? But again, what is the quality of your lesson? That depends on the actual objective. And the objective might not be rational. Maybe they're just a perfectionist. Okay, great comment.
Yeah, I'd like to just add, I think it's interesting because I've said this to a couple of people I've worked with, is even in the US, we're speaking English. Sometimes you meet someone and they're from the South. You meet someone, you say, you must be from New York or Long Island or Boston. And people have different ways of speaking, even though we all speak the same language. So having that accent is not necessarily a bad thing. And people from different parts of the country don't necessarily try to change their accent unless it's important to maybe their work or, if they're a speaker or something where they need to make that adjustment.
That's exactly right. In fact, possibly when you're learning a word for the first time, that's when you give them the proper calibration. So, how do you say this word? This way. That's when you'll focus on pronunciation. And then afterwards, if there's some modification that they have based on whatever region they're from or whatever language background they have, that's fine. But you want to give them the best sample at the beginning so that they can hit the target, right? They might not hit the target exactly, but you want them aiming in the right direction. And that's what you can help them do, especially by telling them what parts or how you're shaping your mouth. What exactly are you doing that's making that sound? All right, terrific. Anything else? You hungry? You want to go to lunch? I know I'm a little hungry myself. So I'll say thanks. And it was my pleasure teaching this subject today. It's one of my favorite. And I hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, sounds good. Have a great day.
Have a good one.
Thank you.